absolutely fine. Just let me black this out. It's all yours.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so thanks for having me. As Ryan said, I am in the Goodman School of Business. I teach marketing, both undergrad and MBAs. I have the fortune of working with Connor as his supervisor, which I'm excited about. I hope you remain excited about working with me. We'll see. Yeah. So my background, I did finance in my undergrad, so that was my official major, but I would say I probably majored in tennis because I was on the tennis team and we played way more tennis than I had to go to school. It was 20 minutes outside of Manhattan in the lovely state of New Jersey. I planned to work on Wall Street, and then I realized I'm not a type A personality, and I didn't really fit in that world. I moved back to Canada after 5 years in the US. I worked in commercial insurance and risk management for about 7 years. Then I went and did my MBA at McMaster in marketing. I met my now wife, and after 6 months of dating, we decided it was a good idea to move to New Zealand together and hope that it worked, and it did. It's 12 years later, so I can officially say it's worked. Yeah, in New Zealand, I worked in New Zealand Post as a marketing analyst. I was applying for PhD programs. I got into Simon Fraser. I'll just be honest, I applied to 5 schools and I got into 1. So it was, not wonderful odds, but I got into Simon Fraser. I lived in Vancouver for 4 years. I absolutely loved it. And I always had an interest in volunteering, and I used to do the CN Tower stair climb, and I used to organize wear your jeans to work day for hurricane relief and things like that. And so I'll tell a story that will seem morbid and weird, potentially. I told it at my PhD defense, so I should remember it pretty well. When I was at Seton Hall for my undergrad, we had a fire on campus, and 3 young boys aged 18 passed away in the fire, and 60 plus kids were injured quite severely as well. Myself and 2 other athletes, we designed and got t-shirts made, and we raised about $20,000 in a few weeks for a memorial fund. The school newspaper ran a story that said that we were actually raising money for our spring break trip for the tennis team. And so at that point, I realized you think if you're doing something good, that people will accept it and perceive positive motives and give you some sort of positive feedback. And that was when I started realizing there are conditions under which the motives that people ascribe aren't correct. And we didn't really know what to do. We could write back and do a letter to the editor or whatever, but at that point, people stopped buying the shirts because they thought we were using it to go to Florida, which was not the case. So for me, I study corporate social responsibility, and I look at the consumer response mostly, and then also how companies advertise it. So how does it relate to my story about the fire? I like to know when it works, when it doesn't. Why do consumers respond positively? When do they not? What are the barriers to saying, yeah, I like that company? Are there some companies that just no matter what they do, they're in an industry that you don't like, or you don't like their reputation, or you don't like their practices in some other field? They could donate hundreds of millions of dollars and people would say, yeah, but you're in pharma, or you're oil, or you're this. And there's always the word big in front of the companies you don't like, right? There's no such thing as, I don't really like small pharma that much. It's always big business, globalization. So I've done some research on how people respond to small businesses and social responsibility, a couple of papers on that. I've looked at green marketing, and during my PhD defense, the last question I got was whether I do green marketing because my last name is Green, and it was like, at that point, I knew I had passed, and I was quite relieved if they were making jokes about my last name. And I still get asked that at conferences. It's not the case. If you use your last name to dictate your career, it'd be a little bit weird. But I am happy I have a paper with my last name in the title, which most people can't do, which is kind of exciting, right? And so I've also looked at it in the context of what benefit do you use? So I've looked at framing. Do you frame it as a benefit to you as a consumer or a benefit to society? And we looked at public self-conscientiousness and whether you're in front of other people or not. So we actually found people who were invited to a coffee taste test, they wouldn't bring the mug if they thought other people were going to find out it was for extra money. But they would overwhelmingly bring their reusable coffee mug if the others around them thought it was to make the world a better place. So I like irrational behavior because I teach consumer behavior. I'm also probably an irrational consumer. And yeah, so I just really like knowing when it works and why it doesn't. And so at times, I'll be honest, I look at everyone else in the ESRC and I know I'm the only business professor, and I think, am I smart enough? Should I be here? But I feel like what I could do is it could open up new partnerships and opportunities where if you're looking at conservation, I could look at what is the mechanism to make it happen, or why would people not do it? So framing something as a gain or a loss, what motivates people. So things like prospect theory and other things like that. And I think all of us, I make my students answer, how many of you care about environmentally friendly products and services and support companies? And I make them hold up their hands, and everyone's hand goes up because they're in front of their peers. And then I say, okay, how many of you always factor in that information into all of your consumer decisions? And then everyone's arms are sort of like, oh, yeah, okay. So the attitude behavior gap is a really interesting element of what I look at. So I like to also incorporate actual behavior. So some of a paper I have on right now, I describe a company as being really socially responsible or really irresponsible or a neutral company. And I gave them chocolate, which unless you're lactose intolerant, most people like. And the taste evaluations were almost 3 points difference out of a 10-point scale. So the poorly managed companies that have been accused of bad practices tasted way, way worse than the neutral and the good company, which I thought was kind of cool. Honestly, there was a paragraph describing the company. So if you can influence that, and it was related to guilt. So people don't want to be consuming from sort of the bad companies. And that I really like the concept of the fact that the negative behavior really outweighs the positive in many cases. So it's more of an avoidance. In terms of methods, I like talking to people, and that's what I found the hardest adjustment for my PhD was how antisocial you sort of become, and you're just like, this is my topic, nothing else matters. I have to graduate, and I started a little bit later in life, so I just wanted to graduate and be done. So I like doing qualitative interviews. I've done content analysis, and I've also done experimental design papers as well. So I think that's kind of me in a nutshell. And now I'm doing research on the music industry randomly, but that's sort of more of my passion. And the last thing I'll say is I started a children's choir for kids from Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and other local social agencies. And we have kids with learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, Tourette's, autism, ADHD. And they sang with Serena Ryder last year. And they sang for about 12,000 people in the last year. So that's sort of my pet project that's really, honestly, more rewarding than when I got a paper published this year, by far. And that's pretty much who I am.
Thanks so much.